All right, folks. So once again, most of you know me, but just in case, I'm Alex, or Alexander, whatever you prefer. One of the co-founders of Socap. At Socap, we basically do a lot of things, but most importantly, we help founders like you to just be better at fundraising, at business development, at things that require network, things that require working with your connections and stuff like that. Been a big part of our community for a long time. And ever since I met him, I was like, really amazed by the level of energy and wisdom that he has. And so I'm super excited to have this workshop for you guys to experience this energy and wisdom as well. Yeah, we're gonna have a little something for you guys after the main part. So stay tuned. And yeah, for now, Jeff, over to you.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I am Jeff Wilson, otherwise known as Professor Dumpster. I'm a two-time founder, former professor, former dean, and the last startup that I had went through Y Combinator and managed to raise what I understand to be, from everyone there, the only fully uncapped round in the entire batch. So I'm going to start off by saying, hey, let's just imagine you've got 60 seconds. You've got one slide to raise $3 million. And think about for a moment how you might do that. And I'm going to give you some tips today and actually show you the deck and take you through the deck that I managed to raise that money with during YC. So when you think about, and when people talk about the way that early stage investors are making decisions, they are generally looking at three things, right? Do you have the tech, right, that is unique and interesting, has a moat and all of that? Do you have a cracked sort of founding team? And do you have a really big market? And even if you have the greatest tech, the greatest team, and the biggest market, this often is not going to get you the money or the investment. What's actually going to get you the investment is a narrative and the story that you tell on top of all of those other things. And so we're going to talk a lot today about story. And funny enough, they don't really teach this anywhere. They don't teach it at GSB. They don't teach it at Harvard Business School, any of the other business schools. It's not something that is commonly just sort of put out there. And even in Y Combinator, I can't remember spending more than maybe 5 or 10 minutes really talking about this throughout the 11-week batch. So the founders that are best at raising money, they're not just building their companies and their tech, but they're telling this story that the investor actually wants to hop on the train of that startup alongside that story and ride. So part one, I'm going to talk about this story and why startups win or die on this narrative. And the story I'm going to use as a case study is going from just being this dumpster dude that I'll go into to being a Y Combinator founder. And this will be a whole case that will relate back to some of your decks and the stories you're telling. So to start off, prior to this dumpster stuff, I was a pretty normal guy. I got a PhD, did my postdoc at Harvard. I won a teaching award where I was rated, I think, the top professor out of about 9,000 in a university system. And I worked at some pretty basic companies, right? IBM, Ernst & Young Strategy Consulting. Had a pretty basic house, had a kid, went to my students' graduation ceremonies, wore the cap and gown, all of this kind of stuff. And then something happened. I had been in academia. I'd been a professor 7 or 8 years. And I was sitting one day at a Starbucks over Thanksgiving on a Tuesday, 2 days before Thanksgiving, actually. And I was working on the revisions to a paper, right? Professors, this is what they do. And this was the paper I was working on: interurban scale dispersion modeling in particular matter concentrations, applications for exposure studies, and cohort story. And man, I just kind of looked up at the sky and I was like, what the hell am I doing, right? nobody is going to read this paper I've probably spent 80 hours on, including my students. And just then, I looked out the window and a guy pulls up in a garbage truck, hops out, opens the fence. I see on his name tag, it says Jeff, throws the trash with the dumpster in the back of the truck. And I had this sort of, moment of awareness where I said, all right. And I actually wrote in my journal at that very moment, you may be able to read this. I conceptualized the dumpster concept, not great grammar, to live food, clothing in a dumpster for 1 year. And so hence this dumpster project was born. Now, we didn't really know what we were doing. And this is a story of a lot of startups, right? Twitch started by following around this guy, Justin, as he was brushing his teeth, right? And was called Justin TV. So this was our first landing page. I mean, it was literally a cat pushing a little cart, dumpster diving. And so we didn't actually have much of an idea of what was going on, but I decided, launch early, as YC says, get a dumpster and just move in. So my old porch became my new porch, the front porch of this dumpster. And, it was a pretty basic idea. I launched early by just going and getting someone to give me a used dumpster. It wasn't even a new one. It was a bit of a retread. I sort of spray washed that thing down and moved in with a few possessions that I had. And then things began to sort of happen as things do in a startup. Things began to break. And this was actually my second night in the dumpster. Yeah, so not the sound you want to hear in the middle of the night, right? As that dump truck went for dump my neighbors there and then came for me. And I had to jump out and be like, hey, guys, no, this is a habitable dumpster. So, the story began like this guy lives in a dumpster. There ended up being a lot of press on it. And all the press was even like living simply in a dumpster. And all the things happened to me that would happen. The things broke in my product, right? My roof was leaking on the upper left there. I was trying to figure out how to cook outdoors. And even the new janitor threw trash as I was painting my living room into my house. You can see my possessions that I had kind of lined up, and it was pretty basic, just, some cardboard on the floor and whatnot. I began to sort of build things out. I had my own little organic garden there. And by the way, I lived on campus behind the dorms. And then you can see my hat in there. I began to build out a little bit more space. Had visitors. My daughter came to visit. My mom even came to visit after a while. And then ultimately, this thing got pretty tricked out. The product got working. And this is what my dumpster looked like at the end. So it wasn't something I was even really that ready to move out with, but that was definitely an MVP, like ready to ship. So this story then shifted again. It came from this guy kind of living in a dumpster to it becoming this educational experiment around minimalism and sustainability. And the press changed with this as well. They had kind of forgotten about just this guy living in a dumpster, and it became part of, it was published in the Sierra Club and all of these sort of green publications. I began to do sustainability lectures, which really wasn't the point of this. And then some student groups actually formed around this. So my students started using it as an educational tool and actually won a bunch of awards as part of a group that they started. We even took the dumpster to like kids' schools. And would go by and say, all right, here is a blank piece of paper and some crayons. And Professor Dumpster doesn't need a whole lot to be happy. So just draw what Professor Dumpster needs to be happy. And there are all kinds of slides and bouncy ball and all kinds of creative things from the kids. But I think this one won the all-time prize of what Professor Dumpster needed to be happy in the dumpster. Disco ball, dumpster wife, and I guess a saint. So that story then that was first a guy living in a dumpster, right? The beginning of this sort of startup that then evolved to an educational mission, then became, all right, what if I quit my job as a university professor and then started thinking about this as an actual startup of micro tech homes? So we started with this startup idea of having just something we took from electric cars. You might be familiar with Rivian and how their cars are built on this vehicle chassis. What we want to do is create a vehicle chassis that not only could become a pop-up home here in the upper left, but a greenhouse, a bathroom, a COVID shelter is when we were starting this, and a bouncy ball gym, or even clipped together into larger things. So the idea was that we could create an entire set of what would become a town or a city and everything needed, including solar batteries and stuff on this one chassis. And then we began to build the product. So on the left, you can see 8 of these chassis. On the right is the very next day popped up into living units. And then we launched this publicly with some, more kind of LA blinged out type prototypes. And then this story of just a basic kind of startup building housing, we applied to YC for the second time, by the way, which you should just continue to apply. And we got in. And so now the story again begins in the press. The story everyone's telling is this sort of evolution, jumping actually straight from Dumpster to this YC startup, forgetting a few of the pivots and shifts and developments along the way. And so during YC, I said, all right, let's do the ultimate dog fooding project. You know that San Francisco isn't exactly the calmest, nicest place. If you've ever lived in San Francisco and walked around downtown, it can be pretty rough. Well, I decided I'm going to move right in the middle of that. And I found a parking lot and I dropped one of my Jupes and moved in and lived there during the batch. So it did have a little bit of a gate I finally got. You can see it there on the back left. And this is right in the middle of Soma, which also is not the easiest neighborhood. And then you can see some of my batchmates. They would come over and we would talk about our startups, do a little skateboarding around, maybe play a little beer pong in the Juke. And it was all going pretty well. The next thing I know, after YC, Gary Tan, right, the CEO now of YC, shows up, and I'm actually pitching him live right in this parking lot. He eventually invested as part of Initialized Capital, led our seed round. And then we ended up, spending some time camping, out in the woods, not camping in a parking lot. So then not only had I moved into San Francisco, but San Francisco moved into me. I was home back here in Marfa over the holidays. Somebody was asking me, how's that going in downtown San Francisco? I was like, it's all good. I just been living there. Nobody bothers me. Literally about 10 minutes later, I got a text, we have a problem. And I got sent these 2 photos. So San Francisco had moved in. A couple of guys had moved in and they were making a really good use of my little camping stove, as well as my water, my Italian dinner candles, the rest of the stuff in there. And rather than saying, oh man, this is a disaster, tear it down, I was like, no, leave those guys there. I'm flying out there tonight and I want to see how they used it, because this kind of gives me another idea of what we might do with this. The guys were gone. I went back and Indiana Jones did the mapped out how they had used things. Excellent user testing, right? And then that kind of helped us to pivot into this idea of homeless, refugee, and disaster relief type shelters. And so we ended up sending some Jupes to Hawaii. And, you look at this entire story, right, from living in a dumpster all the way through these pivots to being a YC-backed startup. And people when they just see this disaster relief, us shipping units to Hawaii, they're like, wow, that was brilliant, right? You lived in a dumpster and, created this story knowing that you were one day going to get into YC. And that just is never the case. You hear these stories in a retrospective, and a lot of this stuff is kind of left out in the narrative. They're always evolving, and then this history that you are making is always going to evolve in your story. So getting back to startups now, this is the case with others. We mentioned Justin TV, which was following around Justin Khan 24/7. That became Twitch. You guys have heard of YouTube, but you probably didn't hear of Tune In and Hook Up, which was the original name and idea, was to create short videos of yourself so that you could find dates. And then there was a company called Tiny Speck, which was a multiplayer game in this sort of surreal fantasy world. If you go to Tiny Speck today, it will actually forward the URL, right, to who they are now today, which is Slack. So you're always kind of making this story up as you go along and you go through these pivots, but there are important aspects of it that you need to tell in your pitch. So let's shift gears now to a second thing I wanted to share with you guys today, and this is actually some very practical stuff. So, you go into pitches thinking, all right, we're going to go right into it. Hey, how are you doing? Where are you today? I'm in New York. Where are you? I'm in San Francisco, or I'm in Tallinn, right? And then you just sort of kick right off. Well, you actually want to ask some questions to sort of set the table and set how you pitch at the very beginning of every pitch. So, I don't know if any of you guys, you can put this in the chat if you know what I'm talking about, but you may have heard this from a very famous book, actually Elon's favorite book, The Answer, where they've asked the answer to life, the universe, and everything, right? So they create this computer. They come back 7 million years later and ask, hey, what is the question? What's the answer to life, universe, and everything? And the answer ends up being from this computer, exactly, Andres, 42, right? Now, the key part of this and the key part of the story is that, like, the computer says, this supercomputer, hey, you got the answer 42 because you weren't asking the right question, right? And so come back in another 3 million years and I'll formulate the ultimate question. You're not going to have to wait that long because I'll give you a few of them. So, you should think about this as interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And so I'm going to give you a few questions around the fit and actually some diligence you can do on the front end to understand where the investor is coming from, the vitals of the fund they're investing out of, whether they're a VC or an angel, and then what you should do at the end of the pitch. So at the beginning, you want to start thinking about, okay, what do they actually know about the space? So you can ask a question like, why do you like investing in this particular space, right? And have you made any other bets that you're proud of? So this does a couple of things. It kind of tells you how much jargon or how much detail you can go into about your technology if they've invested in a lot of other ones. And then it also is a way to get at, hey, could they just be talking to me because they want information for one of their other investments they've already made? Because most honest VCs are going to say, hey, we've made a bet in this space that is very similar to yours, but we, think that the two of them could work well together. The other thing you want to ask is, what trends are you seeing in the space? So this is not only to evaluate their expertise, but also to give you a clue on what you should focus. So if they say, hey, we're going full on back into wrappers right now, and we're looking for an app store for AI apps, well, then you can focus down part of your pitch and your presentation on that specific part, because, there's this so-called golden rule, do unto others that you would have them do unto you. You really want to live by the platinum rule, which is speak to others and do unto others as they would have you speak to them, right? And that's how you get at some of this. Last one on expertise is, like, what are some of the big challenges you see and how have your companies addressed these? Again, this is going to give you the ability to enact the platinum rule and talk about things that they may actually think are problems in the space that your startup addresses. So then we're going to skip to vitals, and this is still at the front end of the actual conversation. And you want to find out sort of where this investor is investing from and how much. So you want to ask about, how big is the fund? Is it their first fund or like their fifth fund? And then importantly, you want to know who their LPs or limited partners are. If you've never heard that term before, LPs are the investors that the investors have. So if you're Andreessen Horowitz and you have a $500 million fund, right, someone had to put that money in. And so it's important to know, all right, are these investors, other startup founders that are going to take a lot of risk? Or are these limited partners, is it the pencil union, right, or the teachers union out of Cleveland? Because they're going to make much more conservative bets, and this can help you with your pitch as well. So the other thing that you'll want to ask about in terms of vitals is how big is their check size, and do they want a targeted percentage ownership, right? And then do they follow investments? Do they co-lead, or do they like to lead investments? So what this can tell you is, you're not actually going to be probably asking for the same amount of money from every investor. So on the front end, if someone says, look, I like to make $1 million bets and I like to capture 10% of the company and I like to lead. All right. Well, at the end, when you're actually saying how much you're raising, if you're raising, 1 million on a $20 million valuation, which is already a little whack, right? You're going to know that you may not be a fit. So this is going to help you to sort of target down your pitch. Now let's go all the way through.
Jeff, just a quick question. So
Yeah.
do you if the most common kind of pitch call is like 30 minutes? So how do you suggest people use the time during these calls with regards to those questions?
Yeah, so what you want to do is I'm going to talk about a rule in a bit of trying to get your pitch down when you're doing it yourself to about 10 or 15 minutes. But if I were splitting these things down at the beginning, I'd use maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Sometimes they'll talk a lot longer, and you may even have to cut them off and say, let's get into the pitch. And I also want to say, you don't ask every one of these questions every time. If you can do some research in advance, you can say, I understand you like to lead, capture 10%, and your average check that you write is about $1 million, right? You can just say, I understand. And then you want to leave, say, 5 to 10 minutes at the end because they're going to have a lot of questions for you, hopefully, right? And then you go ahead into the closing. So one of the other questions that you want to ask at the very end is that, what does it look like, right? You want to get an idea of how long it's going to take for you to get the check, what the process looks like. Do they have to go through an investment committee meeting? And then do they have to come back to you and have a partner meeting? Or can they make the decision at the investment committee and write the check next week? You also want to know, how long does it take to get that check? And then this is a question almost no one asks that I think is very interesting. And I've actually seen VCs pause a few times and have to think about it. It's like, when did you write your very last check, right? And this is great for an angel investor as well. And then you can ask what it was, right? Because some of them say, actually, we haven't written any checks in like 4 months, right? We're at the end of this fund. We're being really careful. Or they may say, we wrote 2 last week, and that's really good information to have.
Another quick question from Aleph. So sometimes the VCs are like, why don't you pitch to us first? How do you handle this objection so that you have the right order and you get to ask them the questions before you do the pitch? Like, do you have any tactical advice here?
Here's how you can do this. You never want to be pushy in these things because it's kind of cringe and a turnoff. So you wouldn't want to say, well, I have some questions for you first. I think the way to sort of take control is that right after you do a couple of pleasant entries, come in and say, hey, can I ask you a couple of questions before we kick it off, right? And then you're going to get a sense if they're like, no, I just want you to give me the pitch. Fine, just do that. But it does help, right? These give you, flip the script a little bit and allow you to do that. So hopefully that makes sense, Elif. Okay, I am also going to share with everybody as a kind of an extra. I have a 3-page narrative with these questions in it. where I actually play the part of a founder that has just founded an AI wrapper startup, I think called like Eat AI or something. And so I'll share that with you guys as a link in the end, if you'll just remind me. Okay, so part 3 of this, we've already been through like that narrative part of this and telling your story and the questions. Now I want to talk about like cutting things down, right? And Alex, asked a good question about how much time should you use. You usually have a 30-minute meeting. A lot of that for your pitch, actually, you should use much less. And generally, your pitch is just too long. There are too many words, both spoken and on the page. And so I'll go back to the dumpster briefly and just talk about like cutting and how it makes things better. So, I went through a baseline cut of all of my stuff when I moved in. I actually put this exact post on my Facebook page, which was a thing back at the time, Facebook. I gave the students my address and I said, look, show up at 6 p.m. The doors will open and everything in my house is $1 per item. Everything that I packed in a backpack. It was all gone in about 45 minutes because I wanted to trim down, right, and get rid of a lot of this noise stuff. But after living in the dumpster, and some pieces that came out, I think a piece came out where the guy said, this guy has like 12 bow ties and like 6 shirts. And I was like, man, I think that's way too many bow ties and way too many shirts. I think I'm going to try to cut down to just one item of clothing. So, this thing that I'm wearing right now, which is like, I guess a jumpsuit and this hat, I actually went back yesterday, just kind of on this point, wondering how long this had been going on. And this was from this year. The photo on the right was from a few days ago in Marfa. The photo on the far left was from 2019, and this is February, almost the same day for the last like 6 years. So I've got one jumpsuit, one hat. We've cut it down to kind of the bare minimum. So let's talk about this applied to startups. Now, most of you guys know about Demo Day, right, at YC. You basically have the ultimate kind of cut, right? You have one slide and you have 1 minute. So they make you, and this is a pitch to like thousands of investors, right? Both live now and on Zoom. And they rehearse this repetitively until your script is exactly a minute, until your one slide is perfect. So this was my slide. This is about how all of them are. You either have a picture of your product, you have your one-line statement, and if you have a hockey stick chart, right, if you have anything that's growing like crazy, you actually put that in place of your product. Now, I'm going to show you, I rehearsed this over and over, my 1 minute. I rehearsed it with Michael Seibel, our group partner. I was ready to go. And I'm going to go ahead and play my Demo Day pitch. This will take a minute. So the first thing I did when they flipped on the camera was we were supposed to be in a secure, quiet environment inside of a room. This was a pitch during COVID where they would test our Wi-Fi connection, make sure it's fast, and it's all controlled. I walked downstairs, got on my hotspot on my phone, and I was sitting on the front steps of this juke when they flipped on the camera. So here it goes. Yeah. Okay, I won't bore you with the rest, but essentially I just decided to go way off script and take about a 10-second pause to actually cut that presentation down less. And it was really weird. I was afraid I might get kicked out of YC for doing this, but I stayed in, and I actually had a few people set up pitch calls with me just to say, bro, I don't invest in hard tech, but I've been going to demo days since the beginning. No one's ever done that. Like, thank you. We needed the break. So you can do some of these things in, a lot of different ways. Cutting down your pitch deck. Let's talk about that. Not just cutting down your 1 minute YC chat. So it's probably too complicated and long. In fact, I can say it is without looking at any of your decks. And so what I've come up with is this sort of primary directive. What I say is the 10-20-40 rule. And there was, I've seen variations of this. I've changed it a bit. I've actually made the 40 larger. The first part of this is that the pitch should be 10 minutes, right? Now, your actual pitch is probably going to go longer than that. But if you cannot get down to 10 minutes of explaining the market size, what your product does, your team, all of that, then you really don't understand it. Number one, you don't understand it well enough. Or number two, you really don't have, sort of the idea to go forward with your startup. Next, the pitch should be short, right? It should be less than 20 slides. You don't want to have 30, 40 slides of detail. If you do have much more detail on things, I can't go into it with a lot of detail now, but I'll give you one example. You want to leave some questions out. If you're getting questions over and over in pitches, there's kind of a hack where you can actually leave that slide out and make it as a separate slide on the side, right? So if you're asked, hey, can you tell me a little bit more about your margins on this project? Oh, that's a great idea. Let me actually pull up. I was thinking about this morning, and then you have a slide that goes into so much excruciating detail on margins. They're going to be like, kind of, wow, right? This person's thought about this a lot. So those extra slides you can put aside. Look, the Coinbase, pretty big company, right? Their first deck was only 11 pages. And then Air Bed and Breakfast, when they were named that, where their idea was to throw air mattresses in all of the homes, their deck was about 12 pages. So the third part of this, the 40, is that your pitch deck, a way to make things simple and to force yourself into kind of a box. The dumpster forced me into getting rid of everything and cutting everything. By not presenting in anything less than 40-point font, you're going to have to reduce the number of words on the page and really work it down. Now, this is important, right? Not only for really having to think about the concepts, but most of your decks, once they've been sent to a VC, they are not sitting here for 30 minutes and going through that deck before they take the meeting. They're getting an oat milk, organic, latte grown, from oats in New Zealand, right? And line at the blue bottle while they're like flipping through their phone, right? And looking at your deck. So you don't have a lot of time really, or a lot of small print to look at this. Now, the master of using large print, right, was Steve Jobs. His presentations, one of the reasons they were so great was that often he would just even have one word, right, or one number on the page. And so, this is a really important thing you want to do when you're pitching. The other thing is that, you should only have these very large words, include a few images, charts, and emojis, and that's it. Tables are generally out. Complicated sort of 4 axes, competitive matrix diagrams, that should be no more than a very simple picture, an image or chart. And, my pitch deck, actually, I'm going to show you in a minute, was just simple charts, emojis, and photos. The one that I was able to raise 3 million with. A slide from Bitcoin, right? Just a new digital currency. From Coinbase's first deck, some emojis, Air Bed and Breakfast, right? Just a few photos of their product and 3 words with some arrows. Now, I'm not going to get into this in a lot of detail. We're going to send out an email later where you can send me the 50 characters for your YC application and I can have a look. part of the reason why I'm not going to go into a lot of this right now is YC applications were actually due a couple of days ago. But this, I will say, you want to spend a lot of time refining and cutting down and down until you get to something that describes your product very clearly without a lot of jargon in it, and generally without saying, we are the X of Y, right? So folks will say, we are the Uber of food delivery. That used to be a lot more popular way to do things, but I just went through Bookface and looked at all of the one-word descriptions from the latest batch of YC companies, and I didn't see any that did that kind of X of Y. So just a few tips on that. So,
by the way, for folks who don't know what Bookface is, it's this secret forum for YC founders, YC alums. Yeah.
Right, that I'm not allowed maybe even to say the word Bookface. But yeah, it's once you go through Y Combinator, you have access to a database called Bookface. It's one of the great sort of perks of being a YC founder sort of for life. Okay, so this kind of final cut of this that I'm going to try to go through in about 5 minutes because I want to give some time for Q&A is this is the actual deck. So obviously, after your 1 minute pitch and your one slide, people do not just start sending you money. Although I did experience 3 times where people did, like on LinkedIn, literally sent me a message saying, hey, I'll send you $50,000. Just send me the safe note, right? We can have a short phone conversation if you want. That doesn't happen that often. And this was at sort of the peak of the bubble. But generally what you do is after demo day, you get a bunch of pitches. They come in through the platform and they set up meetings with you. So this is the exact presentation I use. All right, we'll start the clock. So Jupe, just add land. You see the emoji, right? And this is probably like 200-point font. Okay, wait a minute. Let me go to the presentation. Sorry, this didn't load. I was like, man, that was a really quick. That wasn't even 5.
Yeah, that was a super quick deck. Yeah.
Give me 1 second. Okay, here's my demo day. Pitch. Everybody can see that? Yeah, good?
Yes, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So Jupe, just add land. So we set up a glamping hotel in 1 day, right? And I just reduced it that. So this is a $3 billion market. It's huge. And this is growing at $500 million a year. Even after COVID, this has continued to grow. But the main problem is that glamping cannot scale. And the way it's done right now is ridiculous, right? You prep all of this land, you dig utilities, there's all these permitting headaches that can take years. You need to construct all these rooms. And the experience is generally pretty poor with a 90% churn. So our solution here at Jupe is to just add land. And we fix this problem by it's fully off-grid with no utility connections. It's 10 times cheaper and 10x faster. We can ship 15 of these units on 1 truck, and we've solved this software platform. We built this software platform because many of the software isn't integrated into a lot of these things. So this is a view of this. This was designed by the guy that designed the Cybertruck that I'd recruited to help work for us. And it's a very clean interior that's popped up from a flat pack. So our core insight was around this chassis. We actually call our unit, our block, a skateboard chassis, and this is 8 of them in the next day. And our tech is this kind of flat-packed modularity that we've worked out that allows us to get into all these different form factors, even pop them together, including batteries, water tanks, all sorts of things like that. So, the old way of doing this was it cost $250,000 per room or RV. It was 180 days to set this up, and it took 7 years to get 300 keys set up in one example, and you had to buy the land. So the Jupe way, only 15,000. It takes a day to set up. We can get 300 keys in 1 year is what we built. And our land partners are Infinity because any piece of land in the world, we can literally drop this on and set up a hotel. Our team consists of me. I had founded another company. I lived in a dumpster for a year and I'd been a research scientist at Harvard. And then my co-founder had been COO of a $100 million Sprinter van conversion, and he was head of biz dev at a hospitality startup, Oyo. We've got people from Airbnb, SpaceX, and Tesla also on the team. Now, our revenue has been screaming. This is booked revenue. So from just Q1 of this year, we have booked up to $6.5 million. That's about 13 million annualized. Our margins are really good at 44% on an early hardware product, and we're growing 72%. So our raise, we're basically just using this money to fund growth around R&D, building our bathroom and kitchen, doing growth marketing, building out our software, and then expanding our licensing model. Ultimately, what we aim to do is solve housing for the 1.3 billion people on the planet that are unhoused. Thank you. End. Okay, let me go back to sharing. So that deck obviously took me, I don't know, less than 10 minutes to pitch that. And it was about the speed that I pitched it live. And obviously a lot of questions came up, right? Let me get back to our audience. But ultimately, right, you know, what did you notice about that deck? It was short, massive words, only emojis, photos, and charts. And it worked, right? Because you want a conversation. And right, Raj, you want it simple, you want it to the point, and you want a conversation around the story and around the narrative with the VC. You don't want to just spew a lot of details and information. They're smart enough that they will ask when they want to double click or drill down into stuff. So just kind of wrapping this up, right? Tell your story, right? That story will continue to evolve. Don't be afraid if you don't know where it's going now, because it'll make sense looking back. You should cut to the absolute bone. Your deck should look something like mine, right? If I can cut it down to those fonts and those emojis, you can too. And then follow this 10-20-40 rule to get there. So what I'd like you guys to do in the next 24 hours, cut that pitch down, right? And then figure out how to tell your story in 60 seconds or less in one slide. And then share them both with somebody that doesn't know about your idea or is outside the space, a sort of civilian, if you will. So thank you guys so much for listening. We're going to take a few questions at the end, but first I want to mention, something else that we're doing, along with Alex and Socap. I've actually put together a course, a class that you can take online that is going to run for a couple of weeks. Let me actually bring up the live share on this. And then Alex can give you, let's see. Yeah, so if you go to Pitching Bootcamp, Socap.ai, Alex can put some information.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat
now or after the Q&A. But essentially, we're going to co-lead a class that goes through a warm-up, a couple of one-on-one sessions with me discussing your deck, how to tell your story, your feedback, and then one at the end, how to pick the KPI that is going to drive investment, cringe behavior, VC Psych 101, how the investment machine works, red flags with investors. You don't want to take investment from everyone, right? You can get into a lot of trouble, and there are ways to kind of detect those red flags when you're ghosted or delayed or rejected, how to handle that. And then a bunch of tools on how to find investors as well. So I'll let Alex share that as well. And then I would love to, take some questions if anyone has some.
Yeah. So just a few things to add on the boot camp. The main reason we decided to host that, to do that, is that both me and Jeff, we've had way too many requests around kind of, helping folks, refine their pitches, just make them better, etc. Even if you look at the applications for the workshop, we got over, I think 40 people that, want to do the deck review. So obviously we would not be able to cram it here. One thing we'll do, as Jeff mentioned, you guys will work on ideally implementing some of these things, like, removing 60% of the stuff from your deck. And then feel free to reply to the email I'm going to send you. We'll do the loom and kind of come back to you on that. But again, if you want, just join our bootcamp. This would be the perfect kind of accountability for you guys to go through that. And accountability is the main thing that we notice from running those bootcamps in the past. Nothing beats that, right? You can procrastinate that over like months and months, or you could actually spend the time. This will be like tough work, hard work, and get the best kind of, the killer pitch, the best pitch you've ever had at the end of those 2 weeks. So that's kind of the main reason why anyone would want to join. And as soon as we finish, kind of in a couple of hours, I'll upload the recording there as well, so that you guys can basically check it out and join. And until the end of this week, we have a special price. So if you guys join this week, you'll have a 33% discount. So make sure that, that you have that in mind. All right. So now let me see if there are any questions about the bootcamp. Oh yeah. Thank you, Siddharth. All right. Let's go ahead.
Yeah, I can also address like a couple of the questions that I saw in there. So a few of these were like very I think detailed questions about like, okay, I saw some tables in there. Okay, my tables that I believe I had were like 3 bullets on each side, right? And that was also the competitive analysis slide. So where it's like, here's what Jupe does, here's what the others do. And I think in the pitch, I actually would mention some of the competitors like AutoCamp. And then, look, I mean, rules are generally meant to be broken, right? So like, you shouldn't take all of this as absolute gospel. You need to adopt it sort of to what you're doing. And then let me see, how do you line up investor meetings if you're not in YC? This is generally like through your own network. I mean, in the boot camp, we spend a lot of time on this. Socap has tools, but there are also...
Yeah, but by the way, you guys are going to get, everyone who participates in the boot camp, you guys are going to get subscription of Socap. And what Socap does, it basically allows you to squeeze in, 99% of the value from your network. So that's how you do this. Well, it'll be part of what we teach you guys to do after you have the pitch ready. And a quick question from Grace: how much time per day during the 2 weeks boot camp? So it's not like you should do like 2 hours a day or something. It's more about the commitment every week, and we more or less expect for you guys to be able to commit at least 5 hours a week to that. Ideally, a little bit more, because the sessions themselves would take kind of 2.5, 3 hours a week. So ideally, you should be able to commit 6, 7 hours a week during those 2 weeks. That's how you get the best possible pitch at the end, right?
Yeah. Okay, and then Qwerty had a question about how would you restructure the pitch when you don't have amazing metrics / team background yet? Yeah, so we're all starting somewhere, right? Like I was literally moving out of a dumpster, and I had been a professor, like the 2 worst things that you could possibly imagine at the very beginning. Like those were like my metrics and team, no metrics. So we talk about this in the boot camp, but you need to find an early growth metric. It doesn't need to be revenue. It doesn't even need to be daily active users, right? It doesn't need to be booked revenue. We will help you figure out. You need to find one KPI. This is something that YC does very well. They tell you your first day there, hey, your KPI is going to be revenue or daily active users or downloads or whatever it is. And you're going to grow that. I think it was like what, Alex, like 7% per week or something over the next 11 weeks. Because the way startups are defined, I think Paul Graham maybe said this, is the only thing that defines a startup is really growth, right? Every other kind of business, its only objective is not growth, right? And with that growth comes innovation and everything else. So you need to find what that metric is going to be that you can grow. The best is revenue. You need to focus on that, right? The other thing, without having a big team background yet, right? You can just focus on impressive things that you've done. You guys are all impressive because you're trying to start a startup right now or starting one. That's impressive enough. But we've
Yeah,
all
that
got
already puts you at
down
1% or even like 0.1%. Yeah.
0.1%, right, of humans out there are have enough, are crazy enough to even be on this call, right? So that's what I would kind of say to that. And again, we'll address some of that. Let's see. What do you have when you have an investor who's taken a longer period of time to make a close decision? All right, there are some things you can do, but the general rule, right, or at least that I've found in really early stage like investing, is that the good investors, if they're angels, they'll almost immediately make a decision. If they don't say, I'm in and here's an amount, like after the pitch or within 24 hours, often they're not going to get there. Now, with VCs, you generally don't meet with someone unless you're meeting with Mark Andreessen, right? Generally at these firms, the one VC that you're going to talk to will not have the ability to make the call. So they go into something called an IC meeting, an investment committee, right? To where they sit around and discuss the startup. Now, maybe in early stage, if it's not a huge investment, they can make the call right there. Those are usually on Mondays. They can make the call right there. What I would say to your, question, Victor, if they are taking forever to answer, to get back to you, then they are probably not in. And one of the things that we'll talk about, right, in more detail is kind of how to figure out, if especially you're being ghosted, right, or told we're not ready yet, how to write the emails, right, to get back in there, or at least figure out if you're out, right? So those are just a couple of things that I'd think about.
But by the way, Jeff, one thing I totally forgot. So if you guys saw, we decided to kind of give away kind of a free mock pitch session with me and Jeff to the person who invites the most people, and that's Channel Stone. I'm not sure if she's here with us on the call. If she is, just to let you know that we're gonna reach out and schedule something. If not, she'll just hear it sometime soon. But just so that you guys know that that we showed you who won. Jeff, before I continue reading the questions, I remember there was one earlier question that we haven't gotten through. I just want to make sure that it doesn't get lost. So Vasily asked, "How about the competition slide? How would you go about this in the pitch?"
Yeah, so there's a couple of things with the competition slide. First off, it's eye-rolly and annoying, but every competition slide, almost every one that I've seen, is a 2x2 matrix like this. And the rule is you are always in the upper right, right? So there's a bunch of dots along those axes, right? So the axes may be, depth of learning on one axis and, low cost on the, and low cost, right, on the other, or UX, let's say that, right? UX compatibility. You're always going to be in the upper right, right? So if you do a little research on those, what is important in that, the most important thing is actually picking those axes, right? So it's not, you don't want to back into it such that I do this, so let me only pick those things. You want to pick the things that actually matter, like to the end customer, right? Whoever that may be. So that's generally how, how those are done. Sometimes folks will not just put a point there, they may put a larger or smaller circle to indicate something like users or geography or something, but you want to, again, make it very simple. Basically the investor should have to read what are the two axes, right? And where you are, and then maybe one recognizable competitor. And it needs to just kind of make sense within like less than 2 seconds. Again, simplicity. Gartner style, exactly. Okay, so are you supposed to necessarily pitch on your first meet? So that's something we'll talk about as well. There's something called the coffee meeting, which is sort of a warm up, right? So kind of depending on where you are in your development process and even geographically, right? What some folks will do is say, hey, I'm not really raising yet. I'm going to start my raise in March, but I want to run my idea by you. I don't really even have a deck and just kind of talk to you about the general idea because it's developing so fast. Now, a lot of folks will just say, no, thank you. Send me the deck when you have it ready. But those are really valuable meetings because not only are you getting feedback from them, but more importantly, you're beginning to develop that relationship because ultimately, the investor is not even investing of those three things in the technology or the market, right? If the market is big enough and the founder is right, they will figure out the solution. They will figure out the technology, right? They will pivot into it. So often people think, oh, we have this patented technology. It's amazing. Everyone's going to invest. No, right? They're investing in the founder. And so building that relationship with the VC is important.
Before we continue reading the questions from the chat, again, folks, if anyone wants to call in, now's the time. So just, use one of the buttons down there. But we also had a couple of questions from the registration link. I wanted to ask one specific one from Mark. From your unique cultural perspective, is it a proper etiquette to remove your shoes before entering a friend's dumpster?
Yeah, actually, I mean, despite the, it having been a dumpster is now my home, right? These things have to be redefined. It's very clean. I mean, including that it wasn't my office, right? Students would come by at odd hours and knock on my door asking, about an essay or a final exam. And I finally had to put like a sign there saying, guys, this is my house. It's not like universal office hours. You would not go knock on your professor's house to ask him a question for an extension, right?
Yeah, that's funny. And then one other one, a bit more serious. What differs you from other fundraisers? Are there any unique skills you have, or you think people should learn, develop, as founders, as entrepreneurs to be better at pitching?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have a sort of strange background, I'm going to admit, right? Like, there's not a lot of founders living in trash cans. I think that being outside the box and being a little bit more yourself and not being afraid to take some of those risks. I mean, they don't have to be crazy, like pausing for a moment of silence in a 1 minute, demo day.
Have you ever done that during a one-on-one pitch?
No, but it's
That
a
might be a
great
cool
idea.
idea for someone to try, guys. If anyone want to try that.
Yeah, I actually just found this. I was Airbnb-ing my house and somebody left this book, Why Woo Woo Works. I'm just going to bring this to the next meeting, right? And be like, actually, could I read from you from my Bible? Bring some yogi tea. No, I haven't actually done that in a pitch, but like, yeah, I think not being afraid to actually incorporate parts of your story, because this is a big thing that people leave out of their decks as well. It is because they're investing in the founder, they want to know, how intimately do you know this problem? Was it your problem? Right? Like me starting a pressurized natural gas, IoT satellite enabled meter doesn't really mean anything to me, right? But living in a small space and learning about coding and zoning and design and stuff, I mean, I really lived that. So it's one of the more important things in a deck, right? And in your story is to tell your story. And I don't think that is pushed enough, right? Your story's probably more relevant and stranger and interesting than you think. And that's one of the things why, I also have a business called Pitch Prof where I help, inexperienced founders, former YC founders kind of one-on-one raise their money. And that's something we spend a lot of time on, and we will spend a lot of time on in the boot camp, talking about your story and how it relates.
to formulate that. All right. If you want to look at some of those questions from the chat, we can go from them. I have quite a few in my sleeve as well. If you don't like any of these.
See.
Yeah. By the way, folks, Jeff has like 10 more minutes, so we'll try to stay as long as possible to answer your questions. So
yeah, cool.
so keep them coming.
Yeah,
If you
so
have.
you've asked, do we need to share all details such as how much we're raising, our valuation in the first meeting, or can that come later? All right, this is one of those things that you have to kind of feel it out, right? Generally, the rule is do not put as little information into writing as you possibly can, right? So what do I mean? A lot of people will put in the end of their deck when they make the ask. You'll notice I didn't put how much I was raising because actually I was only raising 2 million and I kind of broke a cardinal rule of raising more than I needed, right? I raised 3 because it was just all coming in so hard. I got tempted, right? And I actually took the money. But if I would have said I have raised 1.9 million of my 2 million in my slides, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to take on some very good investors that I just wanted as investors, right? As partners. So generally, you can say you're raising a seed or a pre-seed round in writing, but I wouldn't even say that, right? Most investors will sort of know about what you're raising. And, most valuations kind of fall in a certain range based on what you're raising without you saying it. But it can turn off and it can turn away people that might have invested if you put it in writing up front. I don't know if that answers your question. And then you did say in the first meeting. Yeah, you will often discuss that in the first meeting. And here's the other thing. If they ask, that is an amazing sign. If you in the pitch and they haven't asked how much you're raising and at what cap, then they're likely either not interested at all or they're not going to invest anytime soon. All right. So it's also an indicator.
The sooner you face the harsh truth, the better. Because like you should not have any like unrealistic expectations or something like this.
Cool. Let's see. Was there anybody
Do you like any other questions? Do you want me to pick a few?
Oh, will you teach the fundraising process after the first pitch, how to close around? Yes, of course. Yes. Like not only after the first pitch, what you need to do in the second one, in the so-called, usually it's called the partner meeting, right? Sometimes you'll have another one in between or a little bit of diligence, but also like, when do you want to start sharing your deep tech, right? People are often, sort of, oh God, I know this person invested in a competitor. How much do I really want to share? Or, when do I want them to sign an NDA? I mean, hot tip, do not ever ask someone to sign an NDA before your first pitch, ever, right? Early stage. That is a hard and fast rule because you will come off like an amateur, right? And there is a very good reason they don't, right? If you're looking at 40 decks a day and you're signing NDAs, it's not only going to slow you down as a VC, but it can get you into a lot of trouble, right? So those generally aren't done till late in the process, but we'll also show you how to negotiate term sheets, right? Once you get an offer from an investor, what you should take and not take. So one tip is don't ever, I don't want to say ever, almost never take what's called a pro rata, right? And we can explain more what that is, but it basically, the investor says, I got 10% of this round. I get 10% of the company forever if I invest. No, right? Not only no, because, it's not something you want to allow somebody that kind of power, but also no, because they're not probably an experienced investor that invests in early stage startups if they say that. See what else?
What would you change? I saw a couple of questions like that because we have some folks who are like, at the idea stage and, they don't think they have enough traction or like KPIs
Yeah.
to focus around, how would you change the deck in that case? Like, what would you do?
Yeah. So
The
there's
deck
a
and the
couple
pitching strategy.
questions there. Yeah. So look, if you don't have revenue, that's fine. Most of the people that go into YC do not have revenue, right? You just say you're pre-revenue, right? And admit that, right? Because like actually it's not a good thing to say you have revenue and even a little bit. You don't even want to mention it, right? Unless that revenue is growing significantly in a hockey stick kind of way. You don't even really want to mention it because what happens is when you say you have revenue, then the investor will fixate on that revenue and is it growing and where it's coming from in the margins. And you'll get a whole other set of questions. I mean, early stage, you're not figuring out revenue. You're trying to figure out how to get customers, right? And grow. So that was a question I think that addressed, is it possible to get investors the company from TEAS or this if the company has no clients yet, right? So even if you don't have customers and you're developing the product, a lot of this you should be able to do with you and your co-founder who should be grinding on no salary and eating ramen and sleeping very little. A lot of that should be able to be built by the two of you or three of you to get those first customers, right? And so we would want to figure out in the workshop, in the bootcamp, how we can help you do that. Should you give a real demo during the call? Yes. So if it's not a in real life pitch, if you have a solid demo, then show it. Now, what I would not do is do a live demo unless they ask. I would record a demo with Loom or something, right? And then I would show a little video of how it works. They may ask, all right, bring it up. Let's do a live one. If they do that, then have some set parameters that you can say, okay, John wants to do this, and test that many times for work. Because the rule of all demos is that they break. Demos like never work, right? Like you're always going to have like whatever that sort of law is. There should be a law made, a law of physics around demos.
All right. Are there any other questions that you like, or do you think we should make it a stop here? Maybe one last question that we can kind of end on is just like any interesting kind of trends that you recently saw when it comes to fundraising, specifically like how Silicon Valley investors are evaluating companies, what are they looking for, etc. Anything that kind of pops
there's so
from
there
your
are a
mind.
couple of things that have happened like broadly. One is there's just kind of a constant shifting in tides of what's hot, right? So, going back to my batch, which was the summer of 21, which was kind of the peak of just money coming into startups, there had to be less than like 5 AI startups out of like 300, 400. And now if you were to look at the most recent batches, right, there's maybe 5 that aren't outside of the hard tech ones, right? And so if you're, making software, like, and I don't say this just to be on trend and hot, like you better be using AI or thinking about how to use it, right? Because this would be like starting a startup, a software startup in the late 90s and not caring about the internet, right? It's sort of a similar thing. And so, you should think deeply about how that fits into your pitch. That's a pretty obvious one. I will say that I don't think investors are sort of snapping to writing checks as fast as well. That there's a little bit more that you want to go into around margins, users, these kind of things, maybe in an early deck, maybe a little bit more than I did in mine.
Awesome. All right. I suggest that we stop here. Thanks, Jeff. That was amazing.